This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
And it was the first time that I'd been given like full creative freedom on the menu. I think Jamie's only kind of direction that he pushed me in was make sure there's some hamon involved. And I was like, sure. I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. We talk about the ethos of supporting local growers, food miles and paddock to plate. But what does it take and what does it truly mean to do this approach to cookery and remain commercially viable too? Sav Sexton is the head chef of Good Gilbert in Adelaide, South Australia. Sav, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You found yourself in Adelaide, but you've been all over the place and grew up in Brisbane. What's it like for you down there at the moment?
It's a little grey and dreary, to be honest. Definitely. I've just been here just over a year now, so it's taken a little while for me to acclimatise to the cold. I grew up in a town called Toowoomba, which is about 2.5 hours west of Brisbane. And yeah, I was pretty shocked when I got down here in September last year to just like the iciest but also driest winter I've ever experienced.
You're working at Good Gilbert as a head chef. Tell us a bit about the venue and what sort of lured you to the role.
Yeah, so I'd finished up, I'd kind of like hit a bit of a wall in Brisbane last year, and I was feeling a little uninspired about like what my next step was. And I've always been drawn to the idea of Adelaide because of the cheese making that kind of happens down here. I've always been like always been into cheese and just kind of wanted to learn more, and Adelaide's a really great place to do it. So, it was probably like mid-August last year. I kind of just sent a bunch of, I sent a couple of cold emails to some venues that I was just really admiring from afar, thanks to Instagram. Good Gilbert was one of the emails that I sent away, and I got talking to Wilson, who's the owner, and we hit it off. We hit it off pretty much immediately, and the timing seemed to kind of fit perfectly, as their head chef at the time was leaving, and I was kind of like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" and so I moved down I packed up my life in Brisbane in about 12 days and came to Adelaide assuming that I was going to have to do like a 14-day hotel quarantine, because it was kind of during that time when Melbourne and Sydney were going through that like bad 2021 run. I packed up my whole life and, came down and started working at GG, and I've been here ever since. So had not looked back.
What's it been like as a chef? You've worked all around the globe, and we'll get into all of that shortly, but South Australia is known for its amazing producers. What's it been like trying to tap into that?
I struggled a little bit when I first moved, most of my professional life really has happened in Brisbane, so I had really great supplier relationships with everybody. And when I got down to Adelaide, it sort of was, I really had to like relearn just like the super simple things. I think the only like company that I was familiar with when I moved to Adelaide was like PFD. yeah, I hit like a pretty big learning curve when I moved down here, trying to connect with people in hospitality, and I didn't know too many chefs when I got down here as well. So, yeah, I spent a bit of time trying to kind of meet as many people in hospitality as I could, and I was super lucky to be completely embraced by pretty much every chef that I met, and a lot of them like pointed me in the right direction when I was searching for local growers and makers and like small like artisans and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I've been super lucky to learn from the others in the community, and yeah, it's been awesome.
Career as a chef is one of the great global careers that's transferable all over the planet. But is there a bit of a difference that you feel, having been in Brisbane for so much of your career, working in Adelaide and the industry there?
Brisbane will always have a really special place in my heart. I originally moved because I went to high school in regional Queensland. Brisbane, honestly, initially it was just for me to kind of get out of the country, to be perfectly honest, and kind of experience a big city. When I first moved, I really wanted to kind of start to learn a little more of the pastry side of kind of cookery. There wasn't really anywhere where I was living at the time where I could learn properly. So initially kind of just wanted to get out of the country and into the city and learn some pastry stuff. But I was really lucky during my time in Brisbane to meet a lot of really inspiring and like special chefs who kind of pointed me in the right direction and took me on a bit of a journey to kind of grow a lot and meet a lot of other great Australian chefs. And yeah, I'm sure somehow that kind of helped my push down to South Australia.
Take us back to when you were young. You mentioned you grew up in Toowoomba. What sort of role did food play in your family growing up?
It was pretty big in our house. I have South African heritage, so we were always kind of around the braai growing up. My father is a horticulturalist. He worked as a park ranger in Girraween National Park for a few years when I was growing up. And since then he's kind of worked as an arborist and a landscaper. So the connection between growing and eating was never really stretched in our house. There was always like a connection with the garden, and where what we ate and where it came from was never, it feels like it was really drummed into me from quite a young age. Like it never felt, I never felt too much of a separation from like what we eat and how it grows. But yeah, my mum's always been a bit of a lover of Donna Hay, bless her. And I think our house was littered with like gourmet travellers and Donna Hayes for pretty much as long as I can remember. So yeah, food was always a pretty key part in our house. So it made sense, just to keep doing that.
Tell us about your first steps into the industry and the impact it had on you.
My first ever kind of job, my dad went to high school with this excellent man named Matt Gilroy. Matt travelled a bit when he was kind of like post-school. He married a beautiful Thai woman named Tiao, and they moved back to Australia. Had two beautiful kids. They grew up in Toowoomba with me, and they opened a Thai restaurant. So I was probably, and it's probably super illegal. Don't get anywhere. No one get mad. I was probably 13 and a half realistically when I started working there. But my first ever job was working in their Thai restaurant, just as like a kitchen hand. I was like scrambling eggs for fried rice and, like just washing up and putting chicken on sticks for satay and that kind of stuff. But that was sort of like my first little taste of the industry. And I started my apprenticeship when I was 15. Like I think I was it was right at the end of grade 10. So I did it while I was still in school. But yeah, honestly, it started pretty young and I have never considered doing anything else.
Take us back to that time in the Thai restaurant. Was there access to ingredients that you hadn't seen before? Do you have any stories of that?
I was thinking about this last night, actually. I have a really vivid memory of Matt showing me how to cut up like a box of capsicums in like a way with the least amount of wastage. And I thought about it yesterday, probably for the first time ever, and I was like, that was probably the beginning of like this whole thing. And just like, I remember there being a lot of mindfulness in the way that we prepared stuff even back then. And I feel like that really trickled down into everything that I've done pretty much ever since. I was super lucky to travel a lot when kind of as I was growing up. I have a little bit of family in Thailand, so I've been twice, which has been amazing. And so I did get like a little taste of some of those unusual Thai ingredients, like tamarind, and I think tamarind's one that always has stuck out for me because I love tamarind so much. It's so delicious, and you can buy these like amazing like tamarind lollies in like the Bangkok airport and just like on every corner in Bangkok, and they're just so sour and they're just so delicious. That's a core food memory for sure. But yeah, I was always intrigued by how everything is grown in Thailand in somewhere that is like so insanely humid, but also is like it's mostly just like rice paddies and mountains, and they have such like an interesting kind of cuisine, and it's so focused on balancing of the flavors, and just the way that it's grown in such a unusual environment to us.
In those early years in Brisbane, what were the real sort of key venues and mentors that helped shape your career?
Definitely Richard Ousby from Stokehouse. I spent a bit of time at Stokehouse, which unfortunately was a victim of COVID closures and didn't quite make it after 2020. I worked there for just under 3 years, and Richard, I feel like you've probably spoken to him before, but he is just the most wholesome chef that I've ever met. Richie is insanely passionate about local farmers and growers, and Richie was a key person in kind of forcing that sustainability ethos and like how we can, what can we do as people in the hospitality industry to take a step in the right direction. And Richie was super passionate about supporting anyone and everyone that had a great food story or great growers. We went on lots of excursions, and we did a lot of amazing things at Stokehouse. It was, I really value my time that I spent there. I learnt a lot.
You mentioned your love of cheese, and you've really immersed yourself in the world of cheese, being a judge and all sorts of things like that. Tell us about that in your life and the experiences you've had.
Yeah, I guess I've always just enjoyed eating cheese, and Again, when I was at Stokehouse, I worked on the pastry section there probably for a large chunk of my time. And a part of my role on pastry was curating the cheese selection. And probably for the first time in my life, I'd been given an opportunity to kind of buy whatever cheese that I wanted, and that was so exciting. I was able to kind of learn a lot more during my time, just being able to purchase like a lot of cheeses I hadn't seen before or heard of. So I was able to kind of grow that repertoire of stuff. I was able to meet Russell Smith, who is one of kind of the old dairy masters in Australia, who got me into the judging for the ECA. And I was invited to do the South Australian dairy judging this year for the first time, which was super exciting as well. I learnt a little more about the making and that kind of stuff this year when, the Adelaide To for some reason seems to be the only place in Australia, maybe even the Southern Hemisphere, that you can actually study like an accredited cheese making. Yeah, I don't know why. It's just like the only place to do it. It's the only place to do like an accredited making course, which is part of the draw that got me down to Adelaide. So I started that the end of January this year. For the first time, got to see the physical side and start doing some making, and really we learnt some cheese science. It really, I guess I had a baseline understanding of how it works, but being able to like feel the curd and like depending on what side, like what type of style of cheese you're making, like how different the curds feel, like the color of the whey, how it changes, like just seeing that side of it, it was pretty special.
Tell us a bit about judging cheese. What do you look for, and how do you approach the judging of it?
So it basically depends. All the kind of the dairies in the show that get like submitted towards the shows get broken into categories, depending on like what the style of cheese is, or if it's yogurt or feta, or hard style cheeses or whatever. They all get broken into categories, and you basically judge depending on taste, texture, and presentation. Everything gets marked out of 20 points. You assume before you taste something, everything starts at 20 and you mark down for defects, instead of, starting at 0 and working up. This year for the Queensland show, I actually did, got not forced. I was got shifted into ice cream gelato sorbet. For the Queensland show is like one of the biggest like frozen shows in Australia. It's just Queensland and New South Wales. I think this year for Queensland we judged like just over like 220 entries in for the frozen show, which was great. It was great doing the SA Dairy Awards this year as well, and just to like see some small artisan producers and just some products that I hadn't seen before, just because they're not like available outside of the state. So it was really good.
You mentioned that you learned how to make cheese and sort of dived into that world as well. Have you been experimenting?
Yeah, a little bit. At the moment at GG, we've got 2 of the cheeses that I made when I was at cheese school. We're currently serving them on our cheese board, which is awesome. So we've got a little cloth-bound cheddar, which is only about 4.5 months old. It's been in a maturing room, just kind of ripening. And we've also got a Stilton style, which is a blue, which actually turned out, I was pretty impressed, honestly, with how the Stilton turned out. It was better than I expected. So, but yeah, definitely some more experiments to come. We're making our own butter at GG at the moment as well for the dining room. So yeah, there's lots of dairy things kind of happening around.
What surprised you about the cheese making process?
How physical it was. It's heavy, yeah. Like, obviously, kind of, we were only doing about 500 litres of milk at a time, which sounds like a lot. But in terms of cheese making, that's really quite small. But yeah, just like when you're making cheddar and just the stirring required, I feel like every cheesemaker on the earth is probably just like totally jacked just from like having to do the stirring and like cutting and stacking the curds. And yeah, there's a real physical aspect to it that I like. Same thing, I probably kind of like understood on a really baseline level that was a thing, but physically doing it, I was like, oh my God.
A real feature of your career has been that focus on local and supporting the local sort of food industry. What's that been like as a head chef, and remaining commercially viable and being able to cook the things that you want to cook? Is it a challenge?
Definitely. I think for me, remaining commercially viable is one of the most important parts of the sustainability kind of focus, is being able to still, post-COVID, I think everybody kind of was forced to have a reconsider of, where their lives and careers were going, especially in hospo. And I know a lot of the people took that opportunity to leave the industry. For me, it kind of made me realize that I wanted to work in a venue that I kind of wanted to hang out in, instead of a venue that I thought was going to look good on my resume, if that makes sense. And post-COVID, I've pretty much fully shifted from the hatted world into small bar world, which I love so much. My first kind of foray into small bars was at Alba in Brisbane. Because, I went, it was still during lockdown. I went to get some takeaway, and Jamie, who's the owner-operator there, and I got talking, and he was like, hey, we're actually kind of looking for a chef. And I was like, hey, I'm unemployed, so... And, but yeah, when I went in to pick up the takeaway, I was like, yeah, this kind of feels like I'm hanging out in my living room, and I love that so much. And I really felt that when that kind of clicked in my brain, that doing something for love over money is way more important. And I really felt my food style kind of emerge during that time, because I was a little less concerned about what everybody thought of me, and all I wanted to do was kind of just make food that felt like I was serving it to my friends in my living room.
Let's talk about your food a little bit. Give us an example or two of that transition and your cooking style now.
I think when I started at Alba, I definitely didn't take myself quite so seriously. And with that came a bit of freedom for me. And Alba was my first head chef gig, really. And it was the first time that I'd been given like full creative freedom on the menu. I think Jamie's only kind of direction that he pushed me in was make sure there's some hamon involved. And I was like, sure. I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. So I kind of started thinking a little bit more about the food that I ate growing up and stuff that kind of, I'm a big believer that a lot of the food that we eat when we're younger create those like food memories. And a lot of stuff that we really enjoy eating as adults is stuff that has some like nostalgic tie. And I pretty much took that and just ran with it. So a lot of the kind of food I'd say I've been creating over the last 2 years is stuff that's super familiar to pretty much everybody. There's lots of riffs on classics. Like I think one of like the biggest sellers probably at Alba was like the roast chicken with like black garlic bread sauce. Like, I mean, that was, you know, it's simple, it's homely, it makes you feel good after you eat it, and it's super familiar food. At Gigi, like recently in the last year, you know, we've been doing everything from sausage rolls to we've got a miso viennetta on the menu at the moment, but it's the same thing. It's that kind of like reading the menu and just understanding what everything is and just being able to execute it for us as chefs in a way that's you probably couldn't pull off at home, but you read the menu going, oh yeah, I know the viennetta. Yeah, I understand what this is about to be, and being able to kind of take a little bit of that guesswork out of food and just have people enjoy.
One thing I've noticed as well is that you often have an off-menu dish. Tell us a bit about that and some of the dishes that you've created.
Honestly, some of the off menus are just like really silly. So Gigi just opened, we just opened our new dining room extension, which is really exciting. So we've collected another like 30 seats, which is super great. And during that renovation, we were able to put in a new kitchen, which is amazing. And with that new kitchen, I was able to hire some new chefs. Super, because I've just been like rocking it out for the last like 11 months by myself in this tiny room that we put some benches and like a tiny deep fryer in, and that was the kitchen that we were working in before. So my two chefs and I, we were having a chat about burrata the other week, and Ange, who's like an absolute legend, just mentioned burrata and like ramen packet seasoning like together, and I was like, okay, I'm into that. Yeah. And it was probably like a week of us discussing this like burrata and ramen packet kind of like how that was going to look. And then, yeah, one Sunday I was at the bakery and I just collected a loaf of like the softest, whitest bread that they had. And yeah, Ramon and I were working just next to each other, and I was like, what about like a tomato burrata sandwich? And we just like empty a packet of like shin ramyun, like just on top of it. And we tried it and it was delicious. And we still had like 3/4 of a loaf of bread left, and there were 5 burratas in the fridge. And we were like, well, might as well just sell it. Like, it's really yummy. But yeah, and yeah, I think the first off menu that we did at Gigi was the omelette. I'm a big breakfast for dinner kind of person. And Gigi, we were kind of, at the time, I think we were only operating, we weren't doing lunches, we were just doing like the 4 p.m. till like late kind of hours. And sometimes we would collect like a little bit of a late lunch crowd. And I think, yeah, one day I just like made an omelette for one of our beer reps actually, who was just like a bit hungry, and I would usually make him like a pickle sandwich, and I didn't have bread or something that day, and I was like, oh, it's okay, I'll make you an omelette. And yeah, it just kind of, we were just making omelettes for a while there. Yeah.
You mentioned that you were rocking out in the kitchen on your own for a long period of time, and now you've been able to assemble a team. What's it been like sort of creating your voice on the plate and really loving that, and then having to sort of the head chef role and looking after a team?
A blessing and a curse of being in Adelaide is that I didn't really know any chefs. So when Wilson and Izzy and I were discussing like what the kitchen team was going to look like, and like how many people, and what that was going to look like for us, we pretty much sort of had to start from like ground zero with hiring. Like we'd known a few chefs, but a lot of them were kind of doing their own thing, and so yeah, we just did the good old fashioned put it up on like the Facebook Adelaide hospitality page, and kind of just hoped for the best. But the two people we did end up hiring were actually not through that channel at all. One of them, Ramon, who has joined us from Mothervine, he was kind of just like a fan, and was following us through Instagram, and one of the Mothervine managers had mentioned that we were expanding, and so one thing led to another, as it does, and Ramon came in, and yeah, we had a chat, and he came on board. And Ange, who is up from the Scenic Hotel, believe it or not, also has spent some time in Brisbane. And yeah, same thing, was kind of looking for another sea change and for a next step. And yeah, so they both come on board, which has been really awesome. After kind of feeling the full effect of the new dining room, we're kind of thinking that we're going to need another prep support person to kind of give us a bit of a push, just heading into summer and stuff. But yeah, it's been interesting to grow a team out of a hospo community that we didn't really know anyone. I guess in Brisbane, if I needed a chef, I would just message, I'd just know someone. Yeah. But yeah, no, it was good though. It's been good.
You uplifted your whole life and moved to Adelaide from Brisbane. What sort of impact has that had on you, and what are you loving about what you're doing?
It was pretty intense when I first got down here. Just everyone in Australia is going through a housing crisis, which I felt in full effect when I first got here. So I was actually sleeping on my boss's, in my boss's spare room, for the first 5 weeks I was here. But since relocating, I've been able to find a really beautiful home. My cat, who was staying with my parents for the first 3 months I was here, has come and joined me, bless his little heart. But yeah, honestly, it probably took me about 10 months to fully acclimatize, and kind of get into the Adelaide vibe. But it really is a special place to come and see. It's nowhere else in Australia, really. It's really quite unique in terms of everything is basically a 20-minute drive away. There's wine regions just down the road, the beaches here, the hills, everything is close enough but far enough,
Well, Sav, congratulations on what you're creating there in Adelaide. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Will do. Thank you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.